Walk into any butcher shop on Earth. Look at the counter. Beef, pork, chicken, lamb, goat, duck, rabbit. Now look again. Every single animal on that counter ate plants. Not one of them ever hunted anything. There is no wolf in the display case. No tiger, no hawk, no fox. 8 billion people, hundreds of cultures, thousands of years of cooking, and nobody built a meal around a predator. That is not a coincidence. That is a rule. And the strange part is that almost nobody has ever noticed it. You have eaten meat your entire life, and you have only ever eaten one kind of animal: the plant eater, the grazer, the thing at the bottom. Today, you are going to find out exactly why. Not the polite answer, the real one. Because the reason is not squeamishness. It is math. It is chemistry. It is disease. And it is something buried in your nervous system that fires before you can think. But before we go anywhere, hold on to this. There is one carnivore that humans do farm, millions of them, right now, on purpose. And the reason that one is allowed, when every other meat eater on the planet is off the menu, is the key that unlocks this entire mystery. Keep that in your pocket. We come back to it. Let me show you how absolute this rule really is. Humans are the most adaptable eaters alive. We eat insects. We eat fermented shark. We eat fungus that grows on corn. We eat eggs of fish scraped from a living body. We eat bird spit in soup. We eat organs, blood, hooves, cartilage, brains. There is almost nothing we have refused. And yet no culture in recorded history built a food chain tradition around eating hunters. Not the Mongols with their wolves. Not the Maasai with their lions. Not the Inuit with their orcas. Not the Aztecs with their jaguars. These people lived beside apex killers for centuries. They knew them intimately. They killed them regularly. They wore them, worshipped them, feared them. But they did not build dinner around them. Isolated cultures with no contact, no shared language, no trade routes, all landed in the same place independently. When that happens in biology, it means something. It means the answer is not cultural at all. Culture varies. This does not. So what did every one of these groups figure out on their own? The answer starts with a single number, and that number is 10. Here is the number. Every time energy moves up one step in nature, about 90% of it vanishes. Grass captures sunlight. A cow eats the grass, but the cow does not keep the grass. It burns it. Walking, breathing, staying warm, growing hair, fighting off infection. By the time you have a cow, roughly 10% of the grass energy is left in the animal. That is the trophic level tax, and nothing escapes it. Not the fastest animal, not the biggest, not the smartest. It is charged on every meal, in every ecosystem, in every era, and it has never once been waived. Now, stack another floor on top. A wolf eats the cow. Same tax, 90% gone. So run the arithmetic backwards. 1 pound of wolf costs you 10 pounds of cow. 10 pounds of cow costs 100 pounds of grass. One steak from a meat eater is 100 pounds of field burned down to a single plate. Now flip that into a farm. If you wanted to raise predator meat commercially, you would need 10 times the land, 10 times the water, 10 times the labor for the same weight of food. That is not a slightly worse business. That is a business that cannot exist. And that is only the first wall. The second one is far stranger because it has nothing to do with cost at all. Here is the part almost nobody knows. Even if energy were free, you still could not farm a carnivore. Because farming an animal requires that animal to agree to 4 things. It has to breed in captivity, calmly, on schedule. It has to tolerate crowding without killing its neighbors. It has to grow up fast. And most importantly, it has to eat something we do not want. That last one is everything. A cow turns grass into protein. Grass is worthless to you. You cannot digest it. The cow is a machine that converts garbage into food. That is the entire deal. A wolf offers you the opposite deal. A wolf eats exactly what you were trying to get. Feeding a predator means handing it your dinner and waiting a year to get 1/10 of it back. It is not a food factory. It is a food shredder. Sit with that for a second because it reframes everything you thought farming was. We did not domesticate animals we liked. We domesticated animals that turned things we could not eat into things we could. If that just rearranged something in your head, subscribe right now, because the next revelation is the one that made scientists rewrite the rules of what is safe to eat. Now leave the farm and go back 60,000 years. You are a hunter. You are hungry. You are looking at 2 animals on the plain. One is a deer. One is a leopard. Which do you go for? The obvious answer is the deer, because the leopard bites back. But that is not the deepest reason. The deepest reason is arithmetic again. In any healthy ecosystem, predators are rare on purpose. That 10% rule does not just limit energy, it limits population. A grassland that supports 10,000 antelope supports maybe 20 lions. Predators are the rarest large animals in any landscape because the system cannot afford more of them. So hunting a predator means tracking the hardest animal to find in the smallest possible population that is armed, that is faster than you, that hunts for a living, and that will actively hunt you back. And the payoff, if you win, is meat that carries less usable energy than the deer standing right there. Every hunter who did that math with their body instead of a calculator went for the deer. Their children went for the deer. 9,000 generations later, you go for the deer. But here is the twist that ruins the neat story. What if the predator is already dead? No danger, free meat. Why not eat it then? Time to kill the biggest myth in this whole subject. People assume predator meat is poisonous. It is not. Lion is not venomous. Wolf will not kill you on contact. If you cooked a fresh cut of tiger properly, you would survive it. So the myth is wrong. But hold on, because the truth is far weirder than the myth. Some predator parts genuinely will hurt you, and not for the reason anyone guesses. Take the polar bear. Arctic explorers learned the hard way that eating polar bear liver can nearly kill a grown man. Not the muscle, the liver. Within hours, the headache starts, then vomiting. Then the skin on the face and hands begins peeling off in sheets. The cause is vitamin A toxicity. Polar bears eat seals. Seals eat fish. Vitamin A stores in the liver at every step and never leaves. By the time it reaches the bear, one serving can carry a lethal human dose. Inuit hunters knew this centuries before anyone isolated a vitamin. They fed bear liver to nobody, and they fed the sled dog's livers to nobody either. They did not know the chemistry. They knew the outcome. And that is the pattern that runs through this entire story. Now watch what happens when you apply that same stacking logic to something far more dangerous than a vitamin. Everything that stacks up a food chain stacks the same way. Not just energy, not just vitamins. Poison. The word for it is biomagnification, and it is one of the most quietly terrifying processes in nature. It works like this. A chemical enters the water at a level so low that instruments barely register it. Plankton absorb it. A small fish eats 10,000 plankton and keeps all the poison but only some of the energy. A bigger fish eats 1,000 small fish. A bigger one eats those. By the top of the chain, a substance that was 1 part per billion in the water can be 1 part per million in the animal. That is a 1,000-fold jump, sometimes far more. Nothing was added. It just concentrated over and over in living tissue. This is why the health advice you already know exists. Nobody warns you about sardines. Everybody warns about mercury in fish like swordfish, marlin, and big tuna. It is not because those species are dirty. It is because they are high. They ate the animals that ate the animals that ate the poison. And if that is what happens to a fish that lives 15 years, imagine what happens to a mammal that lives 40. Here is that number, and it is genuinely disturbing. Some populations of orca are now considered among the most chemically contaminated animals on the planet. Their fat carries industrial compounds called PCBs at concentrations that would classify their bodies as hazardous waste in several countries. These chemicals were banned decades ago. They are still there because they do not break down and they do not leave. They sit in fat. And this is the cruel part. When an orca mother nurses, she produces the fattiest milk in the animal kingdom, and she transfers a huge share of her lifetime chemical load directly into her firstborn. Some populations have not successfully raised a calf in years. That is the real meaning of sitting at the top. An apex predator is not just an animal. It is a filter that has been running for its entire life, collecting everything the world below it touched, and storing it in the exact tissue you would be eating. Now, you might be thinking you would simply trim the fat off. That would help, but it would not save you from the next problem. And the next problem is alive. Predators eat raw meat every single day for their entire lives. That one habit turns their bodies into hotels for organisms that specialize in exactly that lifestyle. The most notorious is a microscopic worm called trichinella, and the illness it causes is trichinosis. Here is how it goes. You eat undercooked meat carrying dormant larvae. Your stomach acid does not kill them. It wakes them. They mature in your intestine, breed, and release thousands of new larvae into your bloodstream. Those larvae do not stay in the gut. They travel. They burrow into muscle tissue, your arms, your diaphragm, the muscles around your eyes, and they curl up inside your own cells to wait. The fever climbs, the face swells. The muscle pain is described by survivors as feeling like being beaten from the inside. Before modern medicine, serious cases killed. And where does it concentrate? Meat eaters and scavengers. Bear, wild boar, walrus, fox, big cats. Arctic communities have recorded outbreaks after single shared meals of undercooked bear. Every culture that ever ate bear developed the same iron rule. Cook it through. No exceptions, no pink. They enforced it like law, because it was. Now here is the counterintuitive layer underneath the parasites, and it is the one biologists find most elegant. The more similar an animal's diet is to yours, the more dangerous its diseases are to you. Think about why. A pathogen adapted to a grass eater lives in a body full of fermenting plant matter. Your gut is nothing like that. But a pathogen adapted to a meat eater already knows how to survive stomach acid, meat protein, and a short digestive tract. That is your body. You are, digestively speaking, a decent match. So predators do not just carry more parasites. They carry parasites that are pre-adapted to make the jump. Wolves and wild dogs carry a tapeworm whose larvae form slow-growing cysts in the human liver and lungs, sometimes taking a decade to be noticed. Cats carry toxoplasma, which rewires the brains of rodents and quietly infects a large share of the human population. Eating the animals that specialize in eating flesh means inviting in the specialists. And that leads to the darkest chapter of this whole story, one that happened in our own lifetime at industrial scale in Europe. In the 20th century, we broke the rule on purpose. Farmers wanted cheaper protein for cattle, so leftover animal remains were processed into meal and fed back to cows. We took a herbivore and turned it into a meat eater by force. And something appeared that nobody had planned for. Not a virus, not a bacterium, a misfolded protein called a prion, which cannot be killed by cooking, freezing, disinfectant, or heat that would sterilize surgical steel. It spread through the herd. Then it crossed into people. The human version destroyed brain tissue with no cure and no recovery. Millions of animals were destroyed to stop it. Feeding animal remains to farm animals was banned across Europe. And the lesson stands as one of the clearest warnings in modern food history. When you move a species up the food chain, you do not just change its diet. You open a door that evolution had kept shut. Nature builds those walls slowly, over millions of years, for reasons we usually only discover after we knock one down. So all of this is rational, all of it is documented, but none of it explains the thing that happens in your body when you picture the meal. Here is something practical that almost never gets mentioned. Predator meat is not good. Not morally, physically. It tastes bad, and the reason is written into the animal's muscles. Flavor in meat comes overwhelmingly from fat, and fat is a storage decision. A grazing animal eats constantly, in low-value mouthfuls, all day long, and its body responds by laying fat down steadily inside the muscle itself. That is marbling. That is why a well-raised cow is tender and rich and forgiving when you cook it. A hunter lives the opposite life. It fasts for days, then gorges, then fasts again. Its muscle is built for one explosive sprint, not for endurance and not for storage. The result is dense, sinewy, dark and dry, packed with connective tissue and threaded with the strong iron flavor of high myoglobin. Cook it and it tightens instead of relaxing. There is a reason every account of eating a big cat or a wolf uses the same words: tough, stringy, sour, strange. And there is one more factor stacked on top of that, which is the state the animal was in when it died. An animal that dies fighting floods its own tissue with stress chemistry. Adrenaline burns through the muscle's stored energy, which changes how the meat sets afterwards, leaving it darker, firmer, and harsher tasting. Farmers and butchers have known for a very long time that a calm death produces better meat than a panicked one. Now consider that a predator, by definition, almost never dies calmly. But the strangest example of all lives in the ocean. Sharks and rays hold urea inside their muscle tissue to balance themselves against seawater. It works beautifully while the animal is alive. The moment it dies, that urea begins converting into ammonia. Fresh shark can smell like cleaning fluid within hours, and eating it in that state causes serious illness. So how did anyone ever eat it? In Iceland, they solved it with patience. The shark is buried and pressed for weeks so the fluids drain away, then hung to dry for months until the compounds finally break down. The result is edible, legal, traditional, and famously overwhelming. That is the length humans will go to for a predator at the top of its chain. Months of processing to undo the chemistry of one meal. Try it. Picture a thick wolf steak. Seared, resting, juices pooling. Something in you recoiled before you finished reading the sentence. And here is what is remarkable. You did not calculate anything. You did not weigh parasite risk. Your reaction arrived first, and your reasoning showed up afterwards, scrambling to justify it. Psychologists who study disgust call this the behavioral immune system. It is your body's first line of defense, and it runs faster than thought. Its whole job is to make you avoid things before they can hurt you, because by the time a toxin is in your blood, deciding is too late. Disgust is not delicacy. It is ancient risk software. Studies of food revulsion have found something striking across very different cultures. People rate the flesh of meat eaters as more repellent than the flesh of plant eaters, even when they cannot say why. Children show it before anyone teaches them. There is no lesson, no rule, no story. The feeling is simply already installed, which raises a genuinely unsettling question. If nobody taught you this, who did? The answer is that nobody taught you. You inherited it. Researchers who study food psychology describe a mental shortcut running underneath human thinking everywhere they look. The idea that you become what you consume. It shows up in language across the world. Eat the heart of a brave animal, gain courage. Eat something filthy, become filthy. It is not logical, but it is not stupid either. For most of human history, it was a decent bet, because what an animal ate genuinely did end up inside you, in the fat, in the muscle, in the parasites. And there is a second reason predator flesh sits so wrong. A meat eater is made of meat that ate meat. That is one short step from something your mind has been trained for millions of years to treat as absolutely forbidden. The closer a food gets to that line, the louder the alarm rings. Your ancestors who felt nothing sometimes ate the wrong animal and did not pass their genes on. Your ancestors who felt the flinch cooked the deer instead. You are descended entirely from the flinchers. That feeling in your gut is not fussiness. It is a message from people who died so you would not have to learn it yourself. Now, let me correct something, because the internet loves to overstate this. Humans have absolutely eaten predators, just not as food in the ordinary sense. Across cultures, killing and consuming a great hunter was almost always ceremony, not dinner. Bear festivals in northern Japan and across Siberia treated the animal as a guest to be honored and returned, with the meal as ritual and the timing fixed by tradition. Warrior cultures on several continents ate small portions of a killed predator's heart or liver specifically to take on its qualities. Hunting groups shared eagle, wolf, and big cat in ways that were coded with rules, restrictions, and prayers. Notice the shape of all of it. Rare, portioned, rule-bound, symbolic. Nobody was raising wolves for the market. Nobody had lion on Tuesday. The predator was meaning, not calories, and every one of those traditions carried strict handling rules attached. Which finally brings us back to the promise from the first minute. Because there is one true meat eater we farm by the million, and understanding why that one works exposes the entire hidden logic of your diet. The answer is the crocodile, and the alligator, and the farmed fish on half the menus in your city. These are genuine hunters, pure carnivores, and we raise them commercially, at scale, profitably. So how do they escape the 10% tax? Because they are cold-blooded. Here is the piece almost nobody connects. A huge share of the energy a mammal or bird eats goes into one thing: staying warm. A wolf is burning fuel every second of its life just to hold its body temperature steady. A crocodile does not do that. It lies still, takes heat from the sun, and burns a tiny fraction of the calories a warm-blooded animal of the same size would need. That makes it dramatically more efficient at converting feed into body weight. A cold-blooded carnivore is one of the most efficient protein converters we have ever farmed. The rule was never actually about meat eating at all. The rule was about waste. Predators were off the menu because warm-blooded predators are catastrophically expensive. Remove the heating bill and the ban quietly disappears. But farmed fish exposes the other half of the problem. And this is the part the industry has spent 30 years wrestling with. Salmon are predators. In the wild, they eat other fish. So early salmon farming had a strange accounting problem. It took several kilos of wild-caught fish ground into feed to produce 1 kilo of farmed salmon. You were not creating protein. You were moving it and losing most of it in transit. That is the 10% rule showing up in a factory instead of a forest. So the industry did the only thing it could. It slowly turned a carnivore into something closer to an omnivore. Modern salmon feed leans heavily on plant proteins and oils, with the fish content pushed down as far as the animal will tolerate. Every time they replace a kilo of fish meal with a kilo of plant matter, they move the salmon one step down the food chain, and the economics improve. Read that again, because it is the whole video in one sentence. To farm a predator, we had to stop it being one. Now, zoom out on the whole history of domestication, because the scoreboard is astonishing. Of all the large land mammals on Earth that humans could plausibly have tamed, only a tiny handful ever made it. Cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, horses, donkeys, camels, llamas, reindeer, water buffalo, yak. A short list. Thousands of years of effort by every civilization that ever existed on every continent, and that is what we ended up with. Now scan that list for a carnivore. There is not one. Not a single large meat eater anywhere on the roster of animals humans raise for food. And it is not for lack of trying. Egyptians kept hyenas, Romans kept big cats. Cultures everywhere captured, penned, and fed predators for status, sport, and spectacle. Every one of those projects stayed a menagerie and never became a farm, because the animals refused at least one of the 4 conditions. They bred badly in captivity, or they killed each other in enclosures, or they grew too slowly, or they demanded the exact food their keepers needed. Domestication is not a story of what humans wanted. It is a story of what biology permitted. And what biology permitted was the plant eater, every single time. At this point, somebody always raises dogs. Dogs have been eaten in various places at various times. And dogs are meat eaters, so does that break the rule? Look closer and it actually proves it. A village dog is not an apex predator. It is a scavenger living on human leftovers, bones, scraps, and grain. Its diet sits far lower on the chain than a wolf's, which means far less accumulation and far less risk. The same applies to the pig and the chicken, which people forget are not herbivores at all. Both are opportunistic omnivores that will happily eat insects, eggs, and worse. But they eat low, they eat cheap, and they eat things we cannot use. That is the qualification. Every animal we have ever domesticated for meat passes the same test. It converts something worthless into something valuable, and it does not sit high enough to concentrate danger. The dog exception is not an exception. It is the rule wearing a different collar. Which leaves one final question, and it is the one that turns this whole video around and points it at you. And if you still think this is about mammals, look up. We eat chicken, turkey, duck, goose, quail, pigeon, and pheasant. Every one of them is a ground feeder living on seeds, grain, greens, and insects. Now, name a bird of prey anyone eats. There is no hawk on a menu, no owl, no eagle, no falcon, no vulture. Same planet, same kitchens, same rule. Just wearing feathers instead of fur. And the vulture is the sharpest example of why. It specializes in eating animals that are already dead and often diseased, and its body is armored for it, with stomach acid strong enough to dissolve bone and destroy pathogens that would kill almost anything else. That is not an animal you want to put inside a human. Scavengers concentrate exactly the material that killed everything they found. The same instinct applies to any predator you stumble across dead in the wild, which is the free meal that sounds so tempting. Ask the obvious question: what killed it? A top hunter that dies of natural causes usually died of disease, injury, or starvation, and all 3 make the carcass more dangerous, not less. Free meat is rarely free, and it never was. Where do you actually sit? Most people assume humans are the apex of everything. We are not. At least not on the plate. When researchers calculated the human trophic level using global food consumption data, the average came out around 2.2 on a scale where pure plant eaters are 2 and pure meat eaters are 5. 2.2. That places the average human diet in the same band as an anchovy or a pig. Not a lion, not a shark, an anchovy. Read that number again. We are dominant on this planet because of tools, cooperation, and cooked food, not because we sit at the top of the food chain. Dietarily, we live near the bottom, where the energy is, where the risk is low, and where the system is stable. And that is not an accident of modern agriculture. It is what our bodies were built around. Our teeth grind, our guts are long enough to handle plants and short enough to handle meat. We are generalists that hedge, and the hedge is exactly why we are still here while the specialists went extinct. So line up everything we found, because none of these reasons are competing. They all point the same direction. Energy says do not eat predators, because 90% of the value is already gone. Population says do not, because they are rare by design and always will be. Farming says do not, because you would be feeding them the food you were trying to eat. Chemistry says do not, because everything that stacks up a chain concentrates at the top, from vitamins to metals to industrial compounds that outlive the factories that made them. Biology says do not, because meat eaters host the parasites best equipped to jump into you. History says do not, in the loudest voice of all, because the one time we forced a plant eater to eat meat, we created a disease that could not be cooked out. And your body says do not, before any of those arguments arrive, with a reflex you never chose and cannot switch off. 6 independent systems, 1 answer. When that many separate lines converge, you are not looking at a preference. You are looking at a law. So go back to the counter where we started. The beef, the chicken, the lamb, the pork, that display case looks like variety. It is not. It is a filter. It is the narrow set of animals that survived every test at once. Cheap to feed, safe to eat, calm enough to keep, and low enough on the food chain that nothing dangerous had time to gather. Everything else was quietly removed, over thousands of years, by people who never knew what a toxin was, never saw a parasite, never heard the word biomagnification, and got the answer right anyway. They got it right because the ones who got it wrong did not become anybody's ancestors. Every farm, every recipe, every tradition you have ever eaten from is downstream of that filter. Nobody sat down and designed it. It assembled itself out of 10,000 years of trial, error, and consequence, and the errors were removed permanently. That meal on your plate is not a menu choice. It is the surviving result of the longest-running experiment in human history, and every wrong answer was paid for by somebody. So the next time you cook, remember that the strangest thing about your dinner is not what is on the plate. It is the enormous list of things that are not. And if you want to see how deep this goes, watch the video on your screen right now, because there is one animal humans domesticated that breaks almost every rule we just covered, and it has been sitting in your kitchen the whole time.